Hello and welcome to CineMaine, where we take a look at films that are connected to Maine, whether they be set in Maine, filmed in Maine, or have any other loose connections to the state of Maine. And today we are looking at the 1995 supernatural family film Casper. Directed by Brad Silberling and based off of the comic book character Casper the Friendly Ghost. Before appearing in this film, Casper had appeared in multiple comics and theatrical cartoons. His own theatrical film came from Universal and Steven Spielberg's production company Amblin Entertainment in 1995. The movie was a pretty big hit at the box office, debuting at number 1 on Memorial Day weekend, as well as being one of the top 10 highest grossing films for the entire year. Its success led to a video game, some direct-to-video prequels, and a Saturday morning cartoon on Fox Kids that also apparently served as a sequel to this film. What connects this film to Maine is of course its setting. Bill Pullman plays a widowed father with a young daughter. Boy, doesn't that seem oddly familiar. Anyway, his character, a paranormal therapist named Dr. Harvey, along with his daughter Kat, head to a haunted mansion located in the town of Friendship, Maine. A name that honestly sounds suspiciously made up if you ask me, but I did some research and apparently this is actually a real town that's located in Maine's coastline in Knox County. Despite the setting for this film being an actual Maine town though, nothing was ever actually filmed in Friendship. A good chunk of the film was actually shot in Maine, however. Most of the outdoor sequences were filmed in Camden, particularly at Camden Harbor. Some additional cinematography also took place in Rockport. The filmmakers chose to film in those towns instead, citing they would be, quote, more authentic. A little odd that the filmmakers would think that a town that isn't Friendship, Maine would look more authentic than the actual Friendship. But with that said, I can definitely tell that this movie was shot in Maine just by watching it. At least when it comes to most of the outdoor scenes. The scenes that weren't filmed in Maine were filmed on sound stages at Universal, and I could definitely tell in some areas. There's the interior of the mansion that Casper and his ghostly uncles are staying at, Whipstaff Manor, as well as this scene where Casper and Kat are sitting on this lighthouse. Maybe it's just me, but it looks like the skyline was green screened into the shot during post-production. There's also an outdoor scene involving a cliff that also looks like a soundstage to me. While Maine is definitely known for the many cliffs on its coastline, I can kinda tell that this cliff was a set and not an actual Maine cliff. The cliffs I've been to look a little different from that. It's even more noticeable to me after revisiting Shutter Island recently. There are other little things throughout the movie that also remind me of Maine, such as this one point where Stephen King gets name dropped.
It's not so bad, huh?
You're Stephen King.
Along with one scene where Dr. Harvey is at a bar having some brewskis with the ghostly trio. Much like Salem's Lot, I'm noticing that there were a bunch of fishing nets and lobster traps in the background. Almost as if the filmmakers thought to themselves, yeah, Maine's known for its lobsters and its beer, so that would help it feel more like Maine. Weirdly enough, there's a Halloween party at Whipstaff Manor being attended by Kat's classmates. Her teacher even shows up dressed as a lobster. There's also this small detail in one scene that definitely reminded me of Maine. It's in Casper's playroom. You may notice there's a model train track close to the ceiling that goes around the entire room. That feels like a Maine thing to me because I can't help but be reminded of Governor's, which, for those unaware, is a restaurant chain located exclusively in Maine. And at every location of theirs I've been to, they've also had a model train track close to their ceiling that goes around the entire restaurant. Granted, that detail could all just be coincidence, but I couldn't help but think of it while watching this movie. I'm not familiar with the pre-existing Casper comics or cartoons, so I don't know if those were set in Maine or if the setting was ever even mentioned in those or not. If the setting in previous iterations was never mentioned, then I have to admit it's really cool that the people who made this film decided to set it and film part of it in Maine. This is kind of a tough movie to review because, on the one hand, I could be super critical and analytical towards this movie, but let's be honest. I think most people who go into this movie have a pretty good idea of what they're gonna get. They're gonna get a 90s kids movie, with some supernatural elements and even some occasional emotional moments here and there, but overall, it's just meant to be fun, lighthearted entertainment. And if that's something you're in the mood for, then you'll probably enjoy it just enough to be glad that you saw it. But for those of you who are curious to know what I did like about this film and what I didn't, here it goes. I'll start off by talking about the CGI effects. It's worth noting that this was the first feature film where the titular character was created entirely using CGI. You would think that since this is the first time that had happened, the effects would probably look terrible nowadays. But honestly, I actually found that the CGI in this film actually holds up better than one would think. This movie came out only less than a year after The Mask, and I noticed that both films were some of the first films to utilize CGI effects primarily for comedic effect, which makes perfect sense for this film considering the cartoony style of the source material. I mean, okay, it doesn't look groundbreaking like Jurassic Park or Planet of the Apes, and yeah, the computer-generated characters do look incredibly cartoony, but this is based off of a comic strip character who had also been a cartoon character before this film, so I think it works pretty well. Considering that and the fact that this film is 30 years old now, these effects still hold up rather well. Even if they did end up terrifying Knuckles quite a bit. If you thought that was unpleasant to look at, my Echidna Warrior friend, try watching that awful direct-to-video prequel that Cat Icarus reviewed a decade ago. Disclaimer, don't actually try watching that film. I saw it on VHS 25 years ago, and honestly, even as a 3-year-old, I thought that movie was stupid. I do, however, recommend checking out Cat Icarus's review of that film. It's one of my favorite videos of his, I watch it every October. Anyway, back to the review. Speaking of visuals, the interior of Whipstaff Manor is gorgeous to look at. Granted, you can definitely tell these scenes were all filmed on a set, but it's definitely a very cool looking set. I love the Art Nouveau aesthetic it has going for it, and it surprisingly reminds me a lot of the movie Mystery Men. Throughout the film, I couldn't help but notice similarities between the interior of this place and Casanova Frankenstein's pad. The acting in this film is perfect for what this movie required. Malachi Pearson is very likable as Casper, and Bill Pullman and Christina Ricci have really good chemistry with one another. I found their father-daughter dynamic to be quite believable, and the scenes they share with Casper are also quite good. I imagine that must have been difficult considering that Casper's a CG character who was added in later during post-production, meaning they both had to act opposite to either a stand-in that was used as a reference for animators, or they'd be acting opposite to thin air. That must have been quite the challenge for them, and I think they both pulled it off beautifully. I particularly like this scene where Cat is hanging out with Casper and he talks not only about the day he died, but also how his father reacted to his death. Not only are Ricci and Pearson both great in this scene, but I can't think of many kids' movies from this era that really touch on the subject of death in such a manner. I've seen it happen a little more often in recent years, but for a movie from 1995, that's pretty impressive. Though admittedly, this does lead me to some of the film's weaker aspects. One being that the third act's pacing is a bit uneven compared to the first two acts. We of course learned that after Casper died, his father invented a machine that could bring ghosts back to life. I will admit it does lead to a cool section of the movie that feels like it was meant to be a Universal Studios ride. One that feels like a car wash that Sweeney Todd designed, only more steampunky. However, the film's main villain, Kerrigan, who inherited Whipstaff Manor after her dad died, is after a treasure that she heard is located in the house. But wouldn't you know it, both her and Dr. Harvey both die at around this point, and as a ghost, Kerrigan successfully gets the treasure and demands that Casper and Cat use the machine to bring her back to life. But let's just say that things get resolved so quickly that you could argue this does make the movie seem a little anticlimactic. While the way she's defeated is pretty clever, and I like Casper choosing to use this machine to bring Dr. Harvey back to life instead of himself, I still remember thinking to myself, oh wow, really? That was it? Okay. And yeah, Kerrigan's kind of a weak villain. I don't blame Kathy Moriarty for this, she did a good job with what she was given to work with. I just didn't find anything about her to be all that memorable outside of the scene I just talked about, obviously. In fact, most of the side characters seemed weak to me too. The ghostly trio are 50-50. The actors playing them have good comedic timing, and their voice work is pretty solid, but at times they kind of felt a little overutilized. Though to be fair, they are comic relief characters in a 90s kids movie, so I'm probably just nitpicking, especially since it could be far worse. There's also this subplot involving this one kid at Kat's new school who pretends to like her so that he can help this generic mean girl set up this prank at a Halloween party she's hosting, but the payoff is just the ghostly trio scaring them away. You could honestly cut this and miss nothing. The humor was also something I found to be hit and miss. Though I did find myself laughing often enough, it is very reliant on celebrity jokes and pop culture references. The film's screenwriters had previously worked on Animaniacs, another Amblin production whose humor was also centered around those two things. These same writers also worked on the subsequent Saturday morning cartoon show spun off from this film. That's pretty cool, actually. I checked an episode of that show out for this review, and what I saw feels very similar to Animaniacs to me. When it comes to this particular movie, though, there are a surprising amount of celebrity cameos in this film. So much so that I'm shocked the star of Starship Troopers wasn't one of the... What's that? He was an extra in the bad direct-to-video prequel I mentioned earlier? Some of the cameos are quite humorous, such as Don Novello, Dan Aykroyd, as well as the Crypt Keeper even. But then others just feel a bit random. Particularly this one bit where Dr. Harvey is looking in a mirror, and his appearance transforms into the director of Juror Number 2, and then the director of Hacksaw Ridge. Or should I say the director of Braveheart, since that movie came out the same week this movie did, and ended up losing to this film at the box office.
It's hell being Mel.
There are a couple of jokes that feel out of place too. Particularly this one bit where everyone is sitting down to breakfast, and Casper's ghost uncles, the Ghostly Trio, sing the melody to Ride of the Valkyries as a way of referencing Apocalypse Now. Yeah, because that's a reference that kids in the 90s are totally gonna get. Although this bit where they reenact the witch's death from Wizard of Oz is kind of humorous. Especially if you know how that film connects to Maine, but that's another review for another day. Going back to this movie's third act, however, you know how I mentioned earlier that Casper decided to use the Up and Atom machine on Dr. Harvey instead of himself after Dr. Harvey had passed away? Well, after he brings Dr. Harvey back, Dr. Harvey's deceased wife and Kat's deceased mother Amelia shows up as a ghost to thank Casper for doing so, and in exchange, grants Casper the wish of returning to his human form again. Which seems sweet enough, but honestly, I think Casper kinda gets gypped by this lady. He's obviously only allowed to return to his human form for a short time, which makes sense, but he asks if he can stay in human form for just a couple more hours, and she tells him no because he's 12 years old. I'm sorry, lady, but this dude's stuck being a 12-year-old for all eternity. He's been stuck being a 12-year-old for like a century. Can't you just give him 2 more measly hours? But then again, I probably am just nitpicking, as admittedly when he does turn back into a ghost in front of the eyes of all of Kat's classmates, their reaction is pretty funny. It may seem like I'm actually nitpicking quite a bit at this point, and yeah, even I have to admit I feel like I am. In all fairness, I think this movie as a whole is pretty decent. I'm not familiar with the source material, so I don't know if it followed it very well, but my guess is that it probably represents its source material decently enough. I'm not sure how kids today would react, but from what I can tell, a lot of people who did grow up with this movie remember it fondly, and honestly, that doesn't surprise me. Would I say this is a masterpiece? No. But do I think of this as a horrible movie? Absolutely not. Overall, it does its job fine. I will say this, when I sat down to watch this film to prepare for this review, I was kinda having a rough week and having trouble getting my mind off of some things that have been bugging me as of late. I only bring this up because watching this film again after so many years had passed, I found myself feeling like I was taken back to a much simpler time, and was feeling more relaxed. And if a movie can do that regardless of whatever flaws it may or may not have, it's definitely doing something right, I think. I guess you might be let down if you're looking for something much deeper or something that tugs at the heartstrings a bit more, but let's be honest, there are so many worse kids movies you could sit through than this one. This one overall is pretty harmless. At its worst, it's just kind of okay, and at its best, it's good-natured, spoopy fun. Which from what I understand is what the source material was also like. If you're someone who enjoyed this movie growing up and still have a soft spot for it as an adult, I can definitely see why. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and also be sure to check out CineMaine's website and be on the lookout for future CineMaine content.